They don't remember a world before iPads. They learned to swipe before they could write. They're growing up with AI as their tutor, climate catastrophe as their baseline, and screens as their primary reality. Generation Alpha, born from 2010 onwards, the oldest are barely 15, the youngest are still in diapers, and they're already the most observed, most analyzed, most psychologically engineered generation in human history. Here's what nobody's saying. We're conducting the largest uncontrolled psychological experiment ever attempted. We're raising an entire generation on technology we barely understand, in an environment we're actively destroying, with methods we haven't tested. Today, I'm revealing what neuroscience and psychology research shows about Generation Alpha. Not predictions, not speculation. What's actually happening to their developing brains right now. This isn't about judging them. They didn't choose this. This is about understanding what happens when you raise humans entirely inside systems designed to capture attention, monetize behavior, and optimize engagement. Screen natives, not digital natives. Gen Z grew up with technology. Gen Alpha is being raised by technology. The difference is crucial. Gen Z remembers learning to use devices. Gen Alpha never learned because they never didn't know. Research from the National Institutes of Health shows that children who receive tablets or smartphones before age 3 show measurably different brain development patterns than previous generations. Their prefrontal cortex, responsible for attention and impulse control, develops differently when constant digital stimulation is present from infancy. This isn't necessarily good or bad, it's different. Their brains are optimizing for a reality where information is instant, entertainment is infinite, and boredom is optional. But here's the cost. Studies show Gen Alpha has significantly lower tolerance for delayed gratification than any previous generation at the same age. The Stanford marshmallow test would be impossible. Why wait for 2 marshmallows when you can have infinite digital marshmallows right now? Their attention spans aren't shorter, they're fragmented. They can hyper-focus on games or videos for hours, but struggle with sustained attention on anything that doesn't provide constant feedback and reward. Neuroscience calls this variable reward conditioning, the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. Gen Alpha's brains are being wired for this from birth. The loneliness epidemic starts early. Gen Alpha has more friends online than previous generations had total social contacts, yet research shows they're experiencing social isolation at unprecedented rates. Why? Because they're learning social skills through screens, not faces. Studies on child development show that humans learn emotional regulation, empathy, and social cues through direct interaction with caregivers and peers. Eye contact, facial expressions, body language, tone of voice. Gen Alpha is getting significant portions of their social interaction through screens where these cues are filtered, distorted, or absent. They're watching other kids on YouTube instead of playing with kids in person. Research from Boston Children's Hospital shows concerning trends. Gen Alpha children demonstrate lower emotional recognition abilities and reduced empathy responses compared to previous generations at the same developmental stage. They can navigate complex digital interfaces before they can read facial expressions accurately. They understand algorithms before they understand human emotion. This creates a generation that's technically connected but emotionally isolated. They know how to interact through screens but struggle with the unpredictability of real human connection. Parentified by millennial anxiety. Gen Alpha is being raised primarily by millennials, the most anxious parenting generation in history. This creates specific psychological patterns. Millennial parents experienced economic collapse, pandemic trauma, and constant crisis. They're raising Gen Alpha with hypervigilance, overprotection, and anxiety transmission. Research on intergenerational anxiety shows that parental anxiety patterns directly transfer to children, especially during early development. Gen Alpha is absorbing their parents' fear of the world. They're given devices to keep them safe and quiet. They're monitored constantly through apps and cameras. They're protected from every possible physical danger while being exposed to infinite psychological danger online. This creates what psychologists call anxious avoidance. They're afraid of the physical world because their parents are afraid. But they're comfortable in digital spaces because that's where safety has been modeled. The Stoics would recognize this as catastrophic. Marcus Aurelius wrote that overprotection creates weakness. Epictetus taught that resilience comes from exposure to difficulty, not protection from it. Gen Alpha is being raised in padded rooms with unlimited access to psychological warfare. Protected from scraped knees, but exposed to cyberbullying, comparison culture, and algorithmic manipulation. The gamification generation. Everything in Gen Alpha's world is gamified. Education, chores, exercise, reading, social interaction. Life itself has progress bars, achievement badges, and reward systems. Apps teach them math through games. They earn points for completing tasks. Their behavior is shaped through digital reward systems from toddlerhood. Research on behavioral psychology shows this creates specific cognitive patterns. Gen Alpha expects immediate feedback. They expect measurable progress. They expect rewards for basic behavior. What happens when real life doesn't provide points, badges, or level ups? When effort doesn't immediately translate to visible achievement? Studies indicate Gen Alpha shows higher rates of frustration with activities that don't provide gamified feedback. Reading a book feels unrewarding because there's no achievement notification. Playing outside feels pointless because there's no score to track. Their motivation is becoming externally dependent on reward systems rather than internally driven by curiosity or intrinsic satisfaction. This is psychological conditioning at scale, and we won't know the full impact for decades. AI as authority figure. Gen Alpha doesn't just use AI, they're being raised by it. AI tutors, AI storytellers, AI companions. Alexa answering questions, ChatGPT doing homework, algorithm-curated content shaping their reality. This creates a fundamentally different relationship with authority and truth than any previous generation. When you grow up asking AI for answers, you develop different critical thinking patterns. Why question or verify when AI seems omniscient? Why think deeply when AI thinks for you? Research on cognitive development shows that outsourcing thinking to technology during formative years reduces development of independent reasoning skills. You don't build the neural pathways you don't use. Gen Alpha is developing in an environment where they never have to struggle with not knowing something. The answer is always one query away. But struggling with not knowing is how humans develop problem-solving, creativity, and resilience. The Stoics emphasized self-examination and independent thought. Seneca wrote about the importance of thinking for yourself, not accepting wisdom second-hand. Gen Alpha is at risk of never developing this capacity because they're never forced to think independently when AI is always available. The climate generation. Gen Alpha will never know a stable climate. Their being born into climate catastrophe as baseline reality. Research shows this creates specific psychological patterns that previous generations, including Gen Z, don't fully share. For Gen Z, climate change is something that happened during their lifetime. For Gen Alpha, it's the only reality they've ever known. Studies on children's environmental awareness show Gen Alpha expresses climate anxiety by age 7 or 8. Not learned from adults, just observed from their reality. Floods, fires, extreme weather aren't exceptional to them. they're normal. This creates either radical adaptability or learned helplessness, depending on how it's processed. Early research suggests Gen Alpha is developing what psychologists call crisis baseline mentality. They assume instability, expect disruption, and plan for chaos because that's all they've experienced. This could make them exceptionally resilient, or it could create a generation that can't imagine stability and therefore never seeks it. The individuality paradox. Gen Alpha's parents tell them they're unique and special constantly. Participation trophies, customized everything, algorithms serving content specifically for them. Yet they're also the most standardized generation. Same apps, same algorithms, same content, same influences. Research on identity formation shows that Gen Alpha exhibits both extreme individuality claims and extreme conformity to trends. They believe they're unique while doing exactly what everyone else is doing. This isn't hypocrisy. This is the psychological result of algorithmic curation. The algorithm tells them they're getting personalized content, so they feel unique, while showing them the same viral trends as millions of others. They develop identity around consumption choices rather than genuine self-discovery. I'm unique because I like this specific content, wear this brand, follow these creators. True individuality requires exposure to diverse perspectives and choosing your own path. Gen Alpha gets algorithmic echo chambers that reinforce existing preferences while claiming to celebrate uniqueness. Language development in the screen age. Gen Alpha is showing concerning patterns in language development that researchers are only beginning to understand. Studies show that children who have significant screen time before age 3 demonstrate delayed language development compared to previous generations. Not because screens prevent language learning, but because screens replace human interaction where language naturally develops. You don't learn conversational rhythm from videos. You don't learn to read social cues from apps. You don't develop complex sentence structure from captions. Research from MIT shows that back and forth conversation with caregivers creates specific neural pathways essential for language processing. Screen time doesn't activate these same pathways. Gen Alpha is developing language differently. They understand digital communication fluently, but struggle with face-to-face conversation, complex verbal expression, and reading comprehension of extended text. They're fluent in emoji, comfortable with abbreviated text, skilled at visual communication, but traditional literacy skills are showing measurable decline. The attention economy victims. Gen Alpha is being raised in the attention economy where every platform, app, and content creator is competing for their focus. These aren't neutral tools. These are billion-dollar systems designed by behavioral psychologists to capture and hold attention through manipulation of dopamine, variable rewards, and infinite scroll. Research on child psychology shows that developing brains are especially vulnerable to these mechanisms. Gen Alpha is being conditioned for addiction before they develop the prefrontal cortex capacity to resist it. Every app they use is A/B tested thousands of times to maximize engagement. Every game is optimized to keep them playing. Every video autoplays the next one. This isn't education or entertainment. This is behavioral conditioning. And it's happening during the exact developmental window when habits, preferences, and neural pathways are being established. The long-term psychological impact is unknowable because this experiment has never been run before. Gen Alpha is the test group, and there's no control group to compare against. The resilience question. Here's what we don't know yet. Will Gen Alpha's unique development create exceptional resilience or exceptional fragility? They're adapting to chaos. learning to process information at unprecedented speed, developing comfort with rapid change and technological integration. Or they're becoming dependent on external stimulation, unable to self-regulate, lacking fundamental human connection skills. The answer is probably both, depending on individual circumstances, parenting approaches, and environmental factors. What's certain is that Gen Alpha will be psychologically different from every generation before them. Not better or worse, different. What this means: if you're raising Gen Alpha children, understand that you're navigating territory no parent has faced before. The old parenting manuals don't apply. The advice from previous generations doesn't translate. Deliberate screen time limits, prioritizing face-to-face interaction, teaching delayed gratification, encouraging boredom, limiting gamification. These aren't optional. These are essential interventions against default psychological conditioning. If you are Gen Alpha, understand that your brain is developing in systems designed to exploit you. Learn to recognize manipulation, practice disconnection, develop skills in physical reality, not just digital. The Stoic principles matter more than ever: self-awareness, critical thinking, delayed gratification. Focus on what you control. These timeless practices are antidotes to the specific psychological challenges Gen Alpha faces. Now I want to hear from you. Are you Gen Alpha, raising Gen Alpha, or observing this generation's development? What psychological patterns are you noticing? Drop a comment below. If this video opened your eyes to the unprecedented psychological experiment happening with Generation Alpha, hit that like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more content exploring psychology, generational differences, and the hidden forces shaping human development. Share this with parents, educators, or anyone working with young children. Understanding Gen Alpha's psychology is essential for supporting their development. Thank you for watching. Generation Alpha didn't choose to be the test subjects in humanity's largest psychological experiment. The least we can do is understand what's happening to them and help them develop resilience for the world they're inheriting. I'll see you in the next video.